I appreciate everyone taking the time to come to our workshop tonight. We're going to be covering two topics today: stretching your additional living expense benefits, and then also how to compare the scope of loss that you might have or your insurance adjuster's estimate to your contractor's estimate, and what does it really mean? How do you break through the logjam if your insurance adjuster is not budging? First, our thank yous. A big thank you to the Community Foundation of Sonoma County for funding our organization, making sure that we're here for the long-term recovery, that our partners, the City of Santa Rosa and Sonoma County, Napa County, California Hope, and also the Street Point Foundation. Everyone probably knows who we are right now. We're a 501c3, we're a nonprofit organization funded by those Community Foundation grants and donations from individuals, not from insurance companies. And our website, we want to just reiterate, www.uphelp.org/North Bay Fires. We post all of our community workshops, partner organization workshops, as well as the recorded workshops. If you can't make one, they are posted at the bottom of the website there. In our Ask an Expert forum, if you have questions in between workshops or need a little bit more guidance, you can log into our website and ask a question. And we'll have one of our expert professional volunteers provide an answer. Not legal advice, but general guidance. All right, so here tonight we have Sandra Watts, who's going to be presenting on the scope of loss portion. We have our California Hope counselors that are out front, and our wonderful volunteer, Fred Booker. We have Matt Everson and Lynn Pham, who will be answering questions during the Q&A portion as well. They're technical professionals. So now I'm going to invite Camille up. She's one of the California Hope counselors, just to talk about the other wildfires that are going around and maybe a little self-care tip.
Hi everyone, I see some familiar faces, so you probably recognize us by now. We're at events all over the county and we have multiple teams. But we are the Hill Project. We are a temporary project that provides essentially network connection. I like to think of us as pollinators, like bees. We make sure you get connected to who you need to be connected to. In the meantime, a lot of folks find it very helpful to speak to our crisis counselors. We come out to wherever you are. It's very non-intimidating. If that's in your house and you feel comfortable, great. If you'd rather meet at a coffee shop or a park, awesome. We do that too. And we also work from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. every day of the week. So if you give us a call and you want to talk about something, we're all ears. We're not therapists, we're not going to diagnose you, but if you would like to seek individual therapy, we absolutely have a network to tap you into for that. I also do presentations much longer than the one I'm going to give tonight about trauma, recovery, and disaster. So here are some of our partners. You can get more of our materials outside and speak to some of our lovely crisis counselors. So given the events right now in Northern California, with all the fires that are happening, I'm getting a lot of calls from folks that are saying, it's been 10 months and I have yet to admit to myself or to people I care about that I need help. Help can look like anything, right? It can be a 20-minute conversation with one of our crisis counselors so that you feel a little less intimidated, a little less alone. I promise you are not crazy. The reactions that folks experience are common reactions to an uncommon event, and I can't stress that enough. Disasters are uncommon events. The way you react is perfectly common and acceptable. Some of the reactions, I've heard a lot of folks say they've changed their eating habits. They need to eat a lot more, eat a lot less. Sleeping habits are disrupted, sleep more, sleep less. Being angry and having outbursts or being irritable. Cognitively, people are having trouble concentrating, focusing, listening in a conversation, and going back and forth when you're communicating with someone. That's been difficult for a lot of folks in the last 10 months. Emotionally, I definitely have folks come up to me and say, I just cried, and I don't know why anymore. We work with all ages, so I even have parents reporting that their children are having outbursts and are crying and having behavioral issues we didn't have before. All of these are common reactions. So, some things to help you, to help regulate those feelings of anxiety and fear. I hear a lot of folks that say the colors of the sunset can be triggering for them, the hot weather, the high winds, just hearing about disasters anywhere else, hearing about the fires, the pictures that are circulating on social media, on the news. All of that brings up a lot of stuff. And I don't know about a lot of you, but that puts me back to where I was in October of 2017. when I look at too many pictures, when I see the videos. There was recently a documentary, Urban Inferno, about Sandra Rosa and that night. It's very, very much a visceral reaction, right? So to address that, what I want to encourage everyone to do is to breathe. Sounds very simple, but I can bet at some point in your life when you've been very stressed, you notice you're holding your breath. And it's not until you leave that meeting or that conversation is over that you go, oh, I was holding all of that in, right? So breath counting is very simple. Pick a number like 3. Inhale for 3, exhale for twice that amount. The reason is when you exhale, you actually lower your heart rate. I know there's a lot of meditation in yoga practice that tells you to inhale and hold it. What you actually want to do is exhale. So pick your number. Stimulating breathing. This gives you something to focus on. A lot of folks will hold the nostril, breathe in through one side, let go, and exhale through the other side. It gives me something to do. It gives me something to focus on that is not the fear that I'm currently feeling building up in my stomach, right? Relaxing breath, the same thing. I inhale for 4, I hold it for 7 seconds, and I exhale for 8 seconds. I really like this method because, again, it gives me something to do. I count. I'm not thinking about how I'm feeling while I'm driving down the highway and I'm looking at the colors of the sunset and it's triggering me. Progressive relaxation. I like this one for helping me get to sleep. A lot of folks are telling me you can't sleep anymore, especially when they can't stay asleep. It's really what's going on. Progressive relaxation, have you ever done it before? It's relaxing every muscle from your toes all the way to your head. I find this easier to do when you're laying down because what you want to do is tense the muscle and let it go. So you tense your toes, let it go. Tense your feet, let it go. So on and so forth until you get all the way up. It helps to breathe at the same time you're doing that. Guided visualization, you can guess. I'm thinking of my happy place. I'm thinking of somewhere that I was enjoying myself. I'm from Hawaii, so I picture a particular beach that I grew up on, and it always makes me happy to think about that. I imagine I can feel the air, I can smell the salt, I feel the sound. All of that helps me get into a different place than the current anxiety I'm feeling. Bouncing, this one's really great. So what you want to do with bouncing, and you notice when you're having a stressful conversation, a lot of people pace, or you get closer to the person who's talking to you because I'm feeling very intense. So bouncing is really simple. I'm feeling very anxious, so I'm bouncing. And when I'm done with the conversation, I'm done with this thought, I stop. I do something to signal, maybe I go like this, and I let it all go. That's the idea behind the movement. Grounding techniques is very, very simple. No one has to know you're doing it. You're sitting somewhere, and again, you're feeling anxious, you're feeling it all start to build up, especially if you're having a difficult phone call or a thought. Grounding simply means I'm reminding myself that I'm here, I'm not in danger, I don't need to evacuate, I'm safe. So an easy way to do this, you're sitting outside a coffee shop or outdoors and say, okay, I'm going to find 5 things that are for me. Tree string. That science stream. Again, I'm distracting myself, I'm recentering, I'm letting myself know that I'm okay. Other things that can help, pretty self-explanatory, reminding yourself that post-traumatic reactions are completely normal. I again want to impress upon you, these are common reactions to an uncommon event. Ways to manage reactions, just like I mentioned, breathing, journaling, whatever helps. Helpful thinking, thank you for being here. This is a very helpful and productive activity. This is a positive way to use your energy and your time to do something about how you might be feeling in the situation you might be in. Coming to workshops like this is a great idea. Spending time with others, connecting, and of course, we're a wine and weed country. Please partake, but in moderation. People tend to overindulge in times of disaster and trauma because, well, I don't have to think about how I feel if I'm negative, right? What can help? Again, a lot of these things are not just for yourself, but for people you might care about. Exactly what it says. Educate yourself, be realistic, ask people questions. You might not know what you need, but they'll tell you. Last thing I want to say is to keep it simple. If every day is a new day to start over again, well, I'm going to focus on one of these 5 things. I might not get all 5 every single day, but I'm going to try. Today I did really, really well. I did 3 square meals, they were healthy meals. Awesome. Check. Moving daily. Didn't have time since the gym today, but I'll make time for a walk. Maybe this week. Great. I'll do that. Hydrating. Water. We're so much made of water that it only makes sense that we drink a lot of it, right? I meet a lot of folks who are stressed. They don't drink enough. And sleeping. Very difficult, but I encourage you to get the best of sleep you can as often as you can. And lastly, connecting with others. Coming to events like this chatting with people who understand your experience, calling one of our crisis counselors just to talk about what's going on, to get help for someone you care about, engaging in neighborhood activities or family activities, whatever makes you feel that it's important. That's how we build resiliency. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, I appreciate it. And again, there's a table out front if anyone would like to connect with them today. All right, so going forward, just a reminder for everyone, it's never too late to start your claim diary. A reminder to present all your requests to your insurance company in writing and to make a working copy of your policy if you haven't already done so. So we're going to talk about your additional living expense coverage for a little bit because we're getting close to that 1-year anniversary and people get a little nervous. So just to keep in mind, you want to look at your declaration page where you'll have the dollar amount for your additional living expense coverage, but then also read the fine print within your policy because it differs with each insurance company, and you want to make sure you understand how your benefits will go throughout your recovery. So you might have both. You might have a dollar amount and a time limit in your policy, or you might just have a time limit, and it'll say like included or something under your coverage. You want to make sure you understand what it is. Whatever that time limit is in the fine print, it's already automatically been extended for 2 years. So that's something that you know because of the declaration that even if it says 12 months within the fine print, that's been extended to 24. But that doesn't necessarily increase the dollar amount if you also have a dollar amount limit. So you want to keep an eye on how much you have and be sure to budget it if you do need to stretch it for as long as possible. And then also, if you have a dollar amount, it's most likely calculated as a percentage of your coverage A. So if you found out you were underinsured for your coverage A, likely you might feel that you do need to stretch it a little bit and it's feeling a little tight. So just keep in mind that that's why it's usually a little tight because it is set as a percentage. But sometimes, it's important to look at the fine print as well because it'll figure out how they are calculating it. Some insurance policies just have language where it says the increased cost of living expenses while your home is uninhabitable. And then some you do the option, like this example, where it's that option or the theoretical value. So there are 2 separate ways that they calculate it. You want to make sure that you read that part so that you know how they're calculating it. If you don't know how much has been issued to you, so you know what's on your declaration page, but you don't know the exact number for your additional living expense coverage that's already been paid out to you, you can write your insurance adjuster a letter and ask them to issue you a statement on how much has been paid out in each category. And if you're taking the time to do that, you might want to add debris removal, trees and shrubs, all those other extras as well, just so that you get a full accounting if you're going to make the effort to at least figure that part out. So what's covered, most of you are very familiar with what's covered already, but it's your rent for your temporary housing, your renter's insurance policy, if you have one at your new temporary place, any new account setup fees, photocopies, moving costs, any pet boarding costs, and if you need an additional list, we have one on our website at uphealth.org/ALE, and then also you can ask your insurance company for their list. And for the most part, it's all on a reimbursed basis. So if you see something on that list and you're like, oh, I didn't know that, you can always submit it and they will send you the reimbursement for it. If you have something that you're unsure of, we always say to ask yourself, is this an expense I incurred because of my wildfire loss? So mileage, copies, setup fees, that sort of thing. And then another way to put that is if you had it and it's not at your temporary housing and you need it, something you can do. For instance, air conditioning. If you have air conditioning at your home that's no longer there, but your temporary housing doesn't have it and it's getting hot outside, that might be something that you can purchase and put in for reimbursement. But as always, sometimes there is a little pushback from your insurance company, so make sure that when you submit a request to give them the common sense argument about what you're asking for and why. But if you do have to really stretch those funds, though, focus on that temporary rent. That's the most important thing. You can't ask for a cash out. We're far along in the disaster where we know about how much your monthly expenses are. And so if you want control over that money, ask for it. Say, we know this is in an as-incurred basis, but we know that we're incurring about this much, and we might run out before the 2-year anniversary. So we're asking you to pay us out so that we can have a better picture of what we're doing financially. The city of Santa Rosa and the county of Sonoma are also very amenable to creative ways for you to put up housing too. So if building a tiny home or some other creative strategy is something that might be good for your situation, go to one of the permit centers and talk to someone there, see if there's something that you can do for a creative solution. And then extension of deadline. So if everyone here has 24 months and you don't feel like you may run out right at 24 months, keep in mind you can always ask for extension. But insurance companies typically need, that reassurance and documentation that it's a reasonable request. So if you're getting close to 2 years and we're a long way out, but the point of going over this now is just to ease a little bit of your concerns about that deadline, keep in mind that you can always ask for an extension. And the best way to do that is to make sure you have some sort of supporting documentation, like an update from your contractor that the moving date is in the foreseeable future. They can put, what their estimate is, and as long as you have the dollar amount of, of your coverage sheet left over, if you have money left over, that is a really good way to anticipate that you'll be able to get that back. One more time, so uphealth.org/samples. All right, so we're going to go to the second portion of our program now. So I'm going to invite Sandra Watts up.
Hi, I'm Sandra Watts. I'm with United Policyholders. I was a claims adjuster for 25 years, and now I work with United Policyholders, and I work for myself. What I'm going to talk to you about is your scope of loss, the dwelling claim process. You guys are probably at the point of your claim where you have received this multiple page scope of loss from your adjuster. The exactimate scope, has everybody received that? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Okay. Those things are daunting. Somebody called me today and they said, I have like 85 pages and I don't know what to do. So I'm going to try to help you sort that out a little bit. But let's talk a little bit about the difference between a scope of loss and an estimate. Okay, so I think it's an important distinction. The scope of loss lists out what you lost, okay? And that goes through from everything that you lost, from the roofing all the way down to the flooring, the framing, all of that stuff. It details the materials, the quantities, and the range of work needed. And we'll talk about getting the scope right. The estimate is when you get that scope and there's money attached to it, okay? That's the price estimate that's involved there. So that's just it's kind of a fine distinction, but it's kind of important as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so this is just a sample of a cover page of an exactimate estimate that was sent on a claim. And you can see here it has a lot of stuff. This is just a summary. It's got the line item, it's got the little fees they put on, tax, overhead and profit, replacement cost minus the deductible. And this was an initial payment that one of you, the residents here, received. And this is pretty typical from an insurance company. They'll send you sort of their first run through. It's many, many pages. And they'll send you a check and, then you're kind of on your own. This is what that same homeowner received from their builder, telling them what it was going to cost to rebuild their house. So you can see the difference. We've got this was a breakdown, and there's more to this than this, but it's to illustrate that this is a little bit more general, okay? So you can see the difference. This is over $500,000, and this one was $358,000. So we've got a price differential. These people were actually lucky because The builder that built their home originally is still here and can build a new home, so that's really actually very helpful. It's very hard for the insurance company to argue with the original builder of your home. The important thing is that first check that you receive is a starting point, okay? These adjusters have to recreate these scopes just based on, you know, what you give them, maybe some plans and so forth. So it's a starting point. You're entitled to the cost to rebuild your house as it was the day it burned, plus your additional coverages, and so that's what you have to help them get to. And really the only way they can get to a correct scope is with your help. So the first thing you need to do is some people I've talked to, and I think this is fairly unusual, but they didn't receive an estimate, they sort of received a breakdown and the check or an appraisal. So you need to know what they based their first payment on, okay, because it's important. So this is just, Emily was talking about sample letters. This is a sample letter. You're entitled to your documents. This is kind of an aside. You're entitled to any documents that they use to determine the value of your claim payments, okay? So you can write to them and ask for those, and they should send them to you. Here's where we are. We've got the initial estimate. It's very big. It's, you know, you've got a big gap between their estimate and what you think it's going to cost to rebuild your house. What are you going to do? The first thing that's really important is that you want to be able to, when you're talking to them, you want to be able to compare your builder's estimate with their estimate, and it's got to be the same. We've got to be talking about the same house. Most people, when they rebuild, don't build the same exact house that they had. They, you know, we didn't like this, so we're going to fix this. The important thing is that you have to settle your claim based on what you had. Okay, and we're not talking about the code upgrades right now. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So you've got to be able to reconcile it, and in order to do that, you have to get what you had. And the real life builders, they don't use Xactimate. Like the insurance companies are really the only people who use Xactimate. So to compare the bids, what you have to do is you have to start with the scope. So what I tell people to do is to make a copy of that and this is a really daunting project, so it's a lot of work, and it's hard, and really the only person who can do it is somebody who lived in the house, somebody who really knew the house, because you've got to go through it line by line, okay, and you have to fix the adjuster's estimate. So when you get there, people kind of worry about the numbers. Don't worry about the numbers on the first estimate. Just put them aside and worry about the accuracy of the scope, okay? Go through, forget about the numbers, those are the second step, but worry about the details on the scope, okay? And so what you need to do is get the details. Double check the size of your rooms, the height of your ceiling. Xactimate defaults to 8-foot ceilings. So if you had 10-foot ceilings, make sure that there's 10-foot ceilings in every room, and it's a big difference in cost. So check everything, and I tell people, you know, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. If it's really overwhelming, do one room at a time. Just do one room and check everything. Start with the floor and work up. And think about what was on your floor. Was it carpet? Was it wood? What kind? How big was your baseboard? Was it detailed big baseboard? Was it just stock small baseboard? How many outlets did you have? What kind of wall texture did you have? Certain wall textures cost more than others, so you have to be really, really detailed, and you need to go through everything. So what you want to do is you want to use everything at your disposal to try to document what you lost and describe in detail. So this is what I was just talking about, like ceilings. This person went from the ceiling down, it doesn't matter. But if you have special finishes, you have rounded, arches, so forth. Things that have really big variations in cost, cabinets. There's really no two sets of cabinets are alike. And one of the things with Xactimate is that they really have like maybe 4 different prices for cabinets. They have like bargain basement and then standard and average and premium, so they just have these categories that are broad categories. So you have to really get specific on those things. Same with like countertops and so forth. Doors, trims, baseboards, drywall. Lighting is important, windows, window coverings, things like switches. Like I have like smart switches in my house, so They wouldn't know that, so you have to make sure that they have on their estimate what you had on attached appliances. Okay, so these are all things, and I know you guys have gone through this already, but building plans, photos, verbal descriptions, all these things. Zillow, sometimes if you bought your house not too long ago, it's on there. So get everything together to kind of help you remember and help document your claim. Okay, so this, have you guys all seen these? This is like a exactament. It's kind of hard to see the way this is in there, but this is kind of an example of a scope with the dimensions. And then each room, if you look, has dimensions on it. So you need to double check those dimensions there. So now the other thing we want to talk about is that we have all these, and you guys know about all these additional coverages. There's tons of them, and they're all over the place. The easiest way to deal with these is to keep them all separate if you can. Because when they start mixing them up, everybody gets confused, and I'll show you what I mean. But so make sure you do a big list, okay? And it's better to it's hard to see it on your declarations. It's better to just write it down. Write down, you've got, this is easy. You've got I didn't put dwelling extension on here, but this is your extended replacement cost. You've got your debris removal. Okay, debris removal applies to your dwelling extension too, your other structures. So if you had like a garage or a barn or something like that and it needs some debris removal, you get that extra 5% for that as well, your code upgrade coverage and your trees and plants. This is just an example of all the different buckets that you have to pull from and how you can take a $100,000 policy and actually it's a $227,000 policy if you add everything up. Okay, this is really hard to see, which is too bad, because this is a summary of loss, and these things, you have to look at them really, really carefully, okay? Because like this one's riddled with errors. So you need to make sure not only that it agrees, but that their math is right, okay? For instance, this right here that I put, this says ordinance or law is 50% of coverage A, and they have a limit of 115,000. Well, the coverage A limit is 473. So the math doesn't even work out there. What I find some adjusters do is they use like as a template and they leave somebody else's stuff on there and then don't, like the coverage limit, I don't know what they're doing, but it's a mess. There's amounts over the limit here that they're not picking up in ordinance or law. They don't have the debris removal here. So you need to go through these summaries and really look at them. And because some of the ways that they do them is crazy. So it's really important to go through there, know what you have, know what you're entitled to. And if you have every kind of estimate separate, you've got, how much your debris removal is, how much your code upgrades are, how much the house is as a base, then you're going to have a much easier time going through all this. The other thing is that I don't really like the way they do this. If I were you guys, and I'm thinking about making my own little summary here that we can put on our website, but I think that these payments should be divided out by cause of loss, because it's really hard to go through just a list of payments and make sure that you got it all right. So you're going to have to pull that out yourself and double check it. And then these are some of the little things that you have to look at. And I know you guys have seen these things, but you've got 10% of ID which is increased dwelling, to cover your dwelling extension. So you need to make sure you get your little bits and pieces out of here. A lot of you are thinking about buying instead of rebuilding. Unfortunately, everything that I just talked about, you have to do anyway. Because what they owe you is what you lost, plus your additional coverages. So you need to make sure you reach an agreement with your insurance company on the dollar amount as if you were rebuilding that house in the same spot. And I know a lot of adjusters get kind of, wigged out when you tell them you're going to build somewhere else or buy a house. All you have to do is focus on what you lost and what they owe you for, okay? And code upgrade and the extended replacement costs are also available. And some policies, it depends on your policy, Some policies say that you have to incur it in order to collect it, which means you've got to spend it. Some policies, and there's endorsements out there, you don't have to do that. You're entitled to the cost it would cost to bring your house up to code. So you need to look at the fine print on that. Make sure you know exactly what's in your pot of money. There's a lot of talk about subtracting for land as well. And so I think there's nowhere in the policy, that says in the policy we do not insure land, which means if something happens to it, they don't pay you for the land. But there's a big debate. There's nowhere in the policy that says, it says repair or replace. There's nothing in there that says we're going to subtract the cost of land, and it hasn't been tested, so it's kind of an interesting concept. So say, for instance, just as a little illustration, say $500,000 is what it would cost to rebuild your house. That's the total amount of your settlement. Well, you go and you find a house for $500,000, right? Well, maybe the house is worth $400 and the land is worth $100. They want to subtract the land from the bottom. That leaves you with a $400,000 house. You haven't been made whole, okay? So there's a lot of issues, and I think that you need to really work it out with your insurer if this is something that you're going to do, and make sure it's really clear up front. I personally don't think that they should subtract the land. What I like people to do on this, and it's kind of a good idea, it's harder when you're downsizing. First off, if you get everything up front, if you can negotiate, get your full policy limit, get your ordinance and law and your increase, if you get that all up front and you're done and they don't owe you anything else, it's none of their business what you buy, what you do with that, okay? It's up to you and the tax man. But if they still owe you money, if your policy says that you have to incur, say, code upgrades before they'll pay you for them, then you have to kind of work with them when you're buying your house. So what we recommend is that you get some sample houses and submit it to them. And so that if I was buying this, how much of my outstanding benefits could I collect? So you need to work on that. If they're holding stuff back and you're trying to downsize, that's kind of where you get into a little issue. If they say you have to incur it, before, and they're trying to change this in the legislature, but it's not, it won't help you guys, unfortunately. But if you're trying to downsize, try to get everything you can up front so that you can, it's your own business what you buy. But you got to work with them. This is just about lowballing, you know. Every once in a while we talk to somebody who gets a good scope, gets a couple reasonable estimates, and the insurance company won't budge. It's a problem. And it's a problem here a little bit because of the supply and demand issues, and you know there's a shortage of contractors, there's shortages of building materials, so prices have increased dramatically here, and a lot of adjusters haven't kept up. A lot of adjusters who come from parts of the country that housing doesn't cost as much and materials don't cost as much have a hard time wrapping their heads around our costs here as well. And so we unfortunately have to educate them about that. Get your estimates from reputable builders. Really be careful that you're just replacing with what you had. Like I said, I always recommend a face-to-face meeting. If you're sitting at a table with the adjuster and your contractor and yourself, you should be able to reach an agreement. At the very least, you should be able to reach an agreement on, okay, we agree on all these things, and this is all we have left to try to work on, and how are we going to address this difference? So you can do that. And then you can hire an expert to do that. Sometimes, it just depends on what they want to do. Okay, these are just lessons learned in hindsight. Take your time. I know it's hard. There's the 24-month ALE. Hopefully the insurers will do the right thing and extend that if you have benefits. But you don't want to rush, but you want to be steady. If you can pay off your mortgage, not everyone can do that. Document everything in writing. We say that over and over, but it's really important. And then this is a big mantra of mine. Always, always, always ask. Don't just let them, on this topic, don't just let them say your estimate is too high. Their job is to adjust this claim. And when you send something in, they have time limits. They have the responsibility to come back to you, and if they're saying no, they have to tell you why, and they really need to break it down and tell you why. And a lot of them don't do it, and a lot of people are like, well, they're just saying no. Make them tell you. Make them support why they're not giving you that extra money. And then be polite, but be persistent. Keep your claim moving forward. You guys all know this. And this is where we see problems. So a lot of times when people are saying, I can't do this, I can't, it turns out they're not comparing apples to apples. So you're free to rebuild your house however you want, but what they owe you is what you lost. So keep that in mind.